Today will be introduction to the basic sword handling. You worked on stances in the last video, and now that you have your sword, you can start playing with it a little bit. First things first, the sword is to be respected. The sword handle your sword like a weapon, not like a toy. When you go to practice, make sure you have a nice space around you. Watch out for your pets. Watch out for your little brother running around, because the sword, even though it's a practice sword, can still hurt things. So you treat the sword as if it was a real sword, not a toy. When you're not using the sword, you need to learn how to stand it up. And the first rule is never throw it on the ground, because that disrespects your sword. The sword represents your practice. And so also on the ground, not only is it disrespectful, but you won't want to step on it, have anybody trip on it or anything like that. So always put your sword somewhere where you know that it is if you're taking a break from the practice. So what I do is I stand it up. And I put it somewhere where it can't fall over too much. I put it at an angle that's pretty secure. Also, sometimes I'll put it like this, on top of something. You can put it back in the sheath, but sometimes when you're practicing a lot and you take a break or something like that, you want to leave the sword out. So anyway, just be aware of where you put your sword. Don't put it on the ground. Now when you're walking around with a sword, there's a special way that we hold the sword in the offhand when it's not in the sword hand. You don't walk around with a sword poking things, because you always want to be aware of how the sword is. So we take the sword and we hold it like this. Like this. So you can walk around with the sword. The sword is facing up and down, and it's not going to poke into anybody. Not like this, where you kind of back into something. Okay, so this is your offhand. Let's name the parts of the sword. This is the blade. This is the Dan Dao with a single edge. And the back is not sharp. So in a Dan Dao, you're allowed to touch your body. That's why you can have it resting on your elbow like this, and you're safe. Now if you're using a Jian, the double-edged sword, you would never hold a double-edged sword like this, because you'd be cutting your arm. So each sword is held differently, but similarly too. In order to hold the blade so that you know exactly where the blade is, the thumb goes over the top. Okay, this is the blade, the guard, the grip, and the pommel, and the flag. Now, in some forms, schools, like traditional school, they don't use the flag, but in the wushu and some other schools, they do use the flag. The flag is to show the direction of the sword and also to deflect, so that your opponent is looking at the flag rather than the edge of the blade. I like the flag because it kind of helps you kind of see the direction of the sword, but when I first learned, we didn't use a flag. So it's up to you. You can take the flag off if it gets in your way, but see if you can use it with the flag on. When you're holding the sword in your offhand, put it in your elbow, crook of your elbow, and the thumb comes over the guard like this, and this finger goes along this side of the grip. That way you know that where the blade is when you rotate your hand. And then the rest of the fingers are holding on like this. You learn how to move the sword around your body so that the blade is not hitting you in any way, because attached to your arm. Okay. In different sets, there'll be different ways to go from the offhand to the gripping. Okay. Some sets, they go like this, and the wushu goes above. So by having the thumb on the top of the guard, you can be aware of the direction of the blade. Okay. On the sword hand, when you finally grab the sword, you want your hand up close to the guard, like this. Now, these swords, these practice swords, the handle is a little bit slippery, so you could put friction tape around it so you get better grip, or you could just try to work with the slippery surface. The main gripping is the thumb and the first finger, and sometimes the second finger, so that when you rotate, sometimes these fingers are loose. So mainly these two fingers, and you want to try to keep your hand up by the guard when you're working with the sword. Don't hold it at the end like this, because you don't have control. Up by the guard. So the offhand, holding like this, walking around, and the sword hand like this. So we'll learn some various techniques today so you can play with the sword. Okay, the first technique that we're working on is basically horizontal slicing. So again, the way that you're grabbing the sword is the top of the sword, because the sword is kind of thin and you can tell the top of the sword is going to be in the web of your hand. So don't hold it like this, and don't hold it like this, because the web of your hand can dictate where the blade is. You always want to be aware of the edge of the blade so that you can have perfect direction of the cut. If you cut like this, just slamming the edge of the sword, you want the cutting edge in the perfect direction. So first exercise will be just practice perfect horizontal cut. On this hand here, you can follow the sword, or you can go opposite. When you get to here, turn the sword, cut, turn the sword, cut, turn the sword, cut. Just do that until you get used to where the blade is. Generally speaking, practice cutting at the waist level, but it can vary high, medium, low. In Kung Fu, we call this building the track, like a railroad track, that your weapon goes back and forth on. So by doing it over and over and over, which is really rote training, it's like building the track so that the sword is always exactly in the same place every time. As you do it, first you have to think about where you need to have the sword going, but after a while it becomes part of your subconscious. So in the beginning you're going to have to concentrate and do it. I want you to do it slow in the beginning. You don't need to do anything fast. Just do it over and over slow, so it's smooth. Okay, for today we're not incorporating too much stance work into the sword. It's once you get used to moving the sword around. Okay, the blade is always going in the direction of the cut. That's a general principle. So you don't go back this way, but you're going to cut, 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 cut. Okay, okay, that's probably good enough for the beginning, just so you can start playing with the sword.